Good morning. This is historian Stephen Ujifusa, and this is the Wet Lunch on the High Seas podcast. There's a popular misconception that the RMS Titanic, which made her ill-fated journey in April of 1912, was the largest ship in the world for a long time. That is not true. During this time, there was an intense competition between the British and the Germans for the title of the largest ship in the world. And within a year, the RMS Titanic would be surpassed in size by two new ships from Germany built by the Hamburg-America Line under the direction of Albert Ballin. The RMS Titanic and her slightly smaller sister ship, the RMS Olympic, weighed in at about 45,000 gross tons and stretched 883 feet long. The two new ships from Germany, the SS Imperator and the SS Vaterland, which were commissioned in 1913 and 1914 respectively, weighed in at 51,000 tons and 54,000 tons. And each were able to carry almost twice the number of passengers, over 4,000 passengers each, 2,500 of which were put into third class in steerage. Due to its proximity to the Russian Empire, Hamburg and its sister port of Bremen were able to capture most of where immigration was coming from in Europe, that is the Russian Empire, Poland, Austria-Hungary. About half of the migrants on these ships were Jews from this area, escaping persecution. The White Star Line, which sailed out of Southampton with calls at Cherbourg and Cobh, Ireland, did not have as big a share of the immigrant market hold as it hoped, because immigration from Northern and Western Europe was declining rapidly. The Titanic and her two sisters, the RMS Olympic of 1911 and the also ill-fated RMS Britannic, which was launched in 1914 but was sunk while serving as a hospital ship by a mine in the Mediterranean, they were only able to carry about 1,000 passengers in third class compared to the 2,500 in the Hamburg-America Line ships. So it was a different business model. The SS Imperator and the SS Vaterland were meant to be people movers on the grandest scale imaginable, able to carry 4,500 people in four classes. But not only were they meant to be extraordinarily big and profitable, but they were also floating symbols of Germany's maritime prowess, and Kaiser Wilhelm II made sure that he had personal involvement in their design, especially with the interior and with their names. Albert Ballin, who was general director of the Hamburg-America Line, hoped for more unifying names for his two magnificent new ships. He hoped to name one of them Europa and the other one America, but the Kaiser, seeing that Germany was building the largest ships in the world, intervened and demanded that the first ship be named Imperator after himself, and the second ship named Vaterland after the country of Germany. And this was something that did not sit well with Albert Ballin, but given that he had to curry favor to the monarch, he obliged. These two ships were built at competing shipyards in Hamburg. The Imperator was constructed over the course of 3 years at the A.G. Vulcan shipyard in Hamburg, and the Vaterland, which was about a year behind the SS Imperator, was completed at the Blum and Voss shipyard, also in Hamburg. And the construction of these ships generated much interest in the press, a lot of nationalistic German chest beating. But Albert Ballin looked at these ships as works of art and also as immense profit machines. He hoped to devastate the White Star Line in terms of size, speed, and luxury, but also immigrant carrying capacity. It must be remembered that the immigrant trade was the most profitable part of the shipping business at this time. Albert Ballin would declare that if I did not have steerage, if I did not have the immigrant trade, the Hamburg-America Line would be bankrupt within a few weeks. And these ships were built using the immense profit streams from earlier vessels from the Hamburg-America Line, mostly carrying immigrants. And they were also, in first class, the last word in luxury, with 2- and 3-story high dining rooms and restaurants. These ships were also meant to be faster than the White Star Line vessels. The Imperator and the Vaterland were planned for the service speed of over 23 knots, which was faster than the Titanic's 21. So these ships were meant to surpass the RMS Titanic and her White Star Line sisters in every respect, in size, speed, and luxury, and most importantly, profitable passenger carrying capacity. The third ship of the series, launched in the spring of 1914, was christened SS Bismarck. She was bigger than the previous two of them. Unfortunately, she would never sail under the Hamburg-America Line flag, and at the end of the war, she would be completed by the White Star Line as reparations for the sunk hospital ship Britannic, and she would be renamed the RMS Majestic. In fact, all three of Albert Ballin's giant ships were seized as wartime reparations and given over to American and British shipping interests. This was actually what did in the Hamburg-America Line in 1918 and 1919, when almost all of their 175 ships were taken by the Allies and given over as war reparations. I'd like to read a short segment from The Last Ships from Hamburg that describes the launch and construction of these three magnificent ships and what they symbolized. They came into service at a time of increasing national competition and international tension, and their grandeur and ambition was the apex of Albert Ballin's career. His good friend Max Vorburg, who was the head of the Vorburg and Company Bank, described Ballin as much more of an artist than an engineer. And also, Albert Ballin built absolutely no provisions into wartime use into these three vessels. He was very much a pacifist, unlike his competitor, the North German Lloyd, whose ships were built basically as auxiliary naval vessels. Albert Ballin had no intention of having these three magnificent ships being used for wartime. History, unfortunately, would prove him wrong, and two of the three ships would serve for military uses, but under different flags. So let me take you back to the late spring of 1913 with the maiden voyage of the SS Imperator, the great Hamburg-America Line ship that surpassed the Titanic in every respect, including safety. She was the first ocean liner built to carry lifeboats with enough capacity for everyone on board. Earlier ships were quickly retrofitted to carry enough lifeboats. The Imperator was built with this provision in mind. On June 11th, 1913, SS Imperator departed Hamburg on her maiden voyage for New York City, with stopovers in Southampton and Cherbourg. Albert Ballin was not aboard. Under the command of Commodore Hans Russer and 4 sub-captains, the Giant sped past Land's End and headed into the North Atlantic. Yet as the ship hit rough seas, it became clear to everyone on board, no matter how much they paid for the trip, that Imperator was top-heavy and had a frightening tendency to roll. Upon her arrival at Hauppauge's Hoboken, New Jersey pier, the new Imperial German flagship had a noticeable list to starboard. On a later voyage, a giant wave struck the vessel and sheared off most of her 9-foot bronze figurehead, a screaming crowned eagle holding a globe in its talons. A ribbon wrapped around the globe proclaimed, "Mein Feld ist die Welt." Despite the problems, the public loved the new ship. On a trip in September, Imperator was almost fully booked with 859 in first class, 647 in second class, 648 in third class, and 1,495 crammed into steerage. Never before were there so many persons on one ship as there are on Imperator, a New York Times reporter radioed from the ship. A great undercurrent caused heavy swells on the first day, and the big ship had its severest test so far. It pitched steadily but did not roll. The ship's performance was hardly good enough for Albert Ballin. Harbor pilots had already given her the nickname Limperator. That October, Ballin ordered Imperator taken out of service for modifications. Workers poured 2,000 tons of cement into her bilge, trimmed 9 feet from her 3 funnels, and carted away crates of marble bathroom fixtures and heavy wood paneling and furniture from her upper decks. What was left of the figurehead was removed from the bow and replaced with decorative scrollwork. A.G. Vulcan covered the 200,000-pound repair costs because the ship was still under her builder's warranty. In May 1914, SS Vaterland, the second ship in the trio, set sail on her maiden voyage from Cuxhaven to New York. Unlike her sister ship Imperator, the Grand Liner operated smoothly and handled the rough North Atlantic with grace. Albert Ballon had every reason to be proud of his new vessel. If the first ship of the class was problematic, Ballon made sure the next two were as perfect as he and his engineers could make them. They would be faster than Imperator, able to sail at 23 knots and cross the Atlantic in only 5 days, and steadier in rough seas. Hapag used Wagnerian language to promote its two new ships, even if no military features such as gun mounts were incorporated in their designs. The Hamburg-America Line has forged 2 fiery weapons of highly tempered steel, 2 sharp, gigantic, gleaming swords, read a company press release. Life is conflict, and a strong man must always be armed for battle, either in order to ward off aught that might hinder him in his course, or in order to advance victoriously along hitherto untrodden paths, and thus attain his goal. This is the duty of the strong. War, after all, was still in the air. Many of his fellow directors at Hapag, however, were still not so sure if this new class of vessels made business sense, and wondered if Ballon was building them simply to thumb his nose at J.P. Morgan. But the numbers made sense for now. One of his big new ships, able to carry about 2,000 immigrants in third class and steerage, could make 12 round trips between Hamburg and New York a year. At full capacity, this meant the combined trio of Imperator, Vaterland, and Bismarck could carry a total of 72,000 migrants per year on westbound trips. Based on 1913 numbers, that would leave 120,000 immigrants who were booking passage on other Hapag ships or who were leaving for ports other than New York. Based on steerage fares of 160 marks, the 3 ships combined could produce about 11,520,000 marks in annual revenue in a best-case scenario, assuming war didn't break out. Accordingly, first and second class fares were almost incidental to the overall profitability of the 3 ships. As maritime historian Frank Brainerd aptly said about them, first class got 2/3 of the ship, but 4/5 of the people were crammed into 1/5 of the space as immigrants. They paid for those great liners. A month after Vaterland's maiden voyage, on June 2nd, 1914, Countess Hanna von Bismarck, granddaughter of the Iron Chancellor, christened the third and final ship of Hapag's new class of people carriers, or she tried to. The Countess and the Kaiser mounted the platform at Hamburg's Blumenvass and waved to the crowds below. She took in hand the bottle of champagne that was attached to the ship with a long cord. The Countess swung the bottle too late, missing the ship's bow as the mammoth vessel began its slide into the Elbe River. The people watching gasped, a bad omen perhaps. The bottle swung back toward the platform. Resplendent as always in his admiral's uniform, Kaiser Wilhelm II caught the bottle with his good arm and swung it back towards the bow. This time, the bottle struck the huge ship, shattering on the prow and spraying its golden bubbling contents into the sunlight. The largest ship in the world, she stretched 950 feet long, and when complete, she would register at 56,000 tons. No passenger liner would surpass Bismarck in size for the next 20 years. That was an excerpt from my book, The Last Ships from Hamburg, Business, Rivalry, and the Race to Save Russia's Jews on the Eve of World War I, that was published by HarperCollins in November of 2023. And as we all know, after the launch of the SS Bismarck in the spring of 1914, the world order, as everyone in Europe knew it, would come to an end with the beginning of World War I. This is the Wet Lunch on the High Seas podcast. This is historian Stephen Ujifusa. Thank you for listening.